Looks good. Hello, and welcome to PoliticOly, episode 14, Black Lives Matter, with a focus on things that are non-local to here in Olympia and Thurston County. For the local perspective and a recap of this week's protest and rally and political activity, and a recap of City Councilor Renata Rollins' call to demilitarize, disarm, and defund the Olympia Police Department. You can check out yesterday's episode, and I will post a link in the description at the end of the video when I post it for replay. Welcome, and if you are joining me, I would love it if you say hi in the chat and make this a discussion. I'd love to hear your comments and questions, and if you're watching the replay, that goes as well. You can comment on the chat here, and I can get back to you on the next episode. You can also find me on Twitter at Oli Stewart, that's my main account, and Oli Politic, which is the account I post show updates for this show. And you can also email PoliticOly@gmail.com with your comments as well. With that said, I'd like to open with a song called Hymn for Trayvon by Braxton Cook. Of that, you can find that on SoundCloud. I will post a link in the description. Welcome to the show today. There is a lot to talk about, and I've already broken my challenge to myself today to get through the episode without saying so we're gonna move forward, and you can laugh at me in the chat if you catch me. All right, so with that said, we'll get right into it. I wanted to play a clip from Stokely Carmichael, and after that I will talk about how that is relevant to what's going on today.
Now, let us begin with the modern period of, I guess we could start with 1956 for our generation. This was the beginning of the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King decided that in Montgomery, Alabama, black people had to pay the same prices on the buses as did white people, but we had to sit in the back. And we could only sit in the back if every available seat was taken by a white person. If a white person was standing, a black person could not sit. So Dr. King and his associates got together and said, "This is inhuman. We will boycott your bus system." Now understand what a boycott is. A boycott is a passive act. It is the most passive political act that anyone can commit, a boycott. Because what the boycott was doing was simply saying, we will not ride your buses. No sort of antagonism. He was not even verbally violent. He was peaceful. Dr. King's policy was that nonviolence would achieve the gains for black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Has none.
Long. And cut it out later. So apologies if you were watching that. Moving along, I wanted to highlight a speech by Eugene Puryear, who you may know from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which you can find on Twitter at PSLWeb. Again, this is Eugene Puryear, and he is speaking in Philadelphia.
Because they are the ones who are causing the violence. The real outside agitators are the cops that come from the suburbs, that shoot down our brothers and sisters, that harass us and stop and frisk, that treat every young black person like a criminal. Come on. They don't care about peace. They don't care about justice. I don't care if they kneel. I don't care if they hold a sign. I don't care if they put out a press release. I don't even care if they hand out water here today. It's all an attempt to take you away from the reality that it's not this movement that has caused chaos. It's the 400 years of racist oppression that black people aren't going to take anymore. You know, they always say, well, it's just a few bad apples. And I always wondered, when people say that, if they just had never heard the whole thing. Because, well, I'm originally a country boy, and I know the quote, it's one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. It's not just one. Every single one of them is rotten, and rotten to the core. If you would stand alongside someone who would murder someone in the street for no reason, you are just as rotten. You are just as complicit. You are just as responsible. And if you're one of these black cops that says, well, I know what it is, well, then why are you doing what you're doing?
Period.
You're doubly complicit because you know it's wrong. So we aren't going to allow any of these fake side issues to stop us from what we need. Justice for George Floyd. Justice for Breonna Taylor. Justice for all victims of police murder.
All right, and again, that was Eugene Puryear with Party for Socialism and Liberation speaking in Philadelphia. What was cut out there when I had the mic issue was that the Stokely Carmichael video shows us that nonviolent protest and peaceful protest is only effective when the oppressor has a conscience, when the person that you're protesting has a conscience. And the United States police forces have none, and that is what we see. And so that is why we call not just for reforms, not just for individual officers to be disciplined, but we call for demilitarizing, disarming, defunding, and ultimately abolishing law enforcement systems as they have existed in the United States over the past 400 years and as they exist today. So we're not going to accept simple, mild reforms. We are going to need to push this deeper into the root causes and the actual solutions that are transformational in how we respond to security and safety and health in our communities. That is a completely new system and not what exists today. So I thought that little speech by Eugene Puryear in Philadelphia, that little clip rather of it, was an excellent illustration. Before I move on, I just want to mention that this shirt I'm wearing was created by a local black artist named Jala. And she sells her designs on Etsy and Zazzle. I'll link to those in the description when I post the replay. But I've got a really awesome hoodie with a Olympia design on it and all kinds of different wonderful designs. You can search La Bebe on Etsy and look at the past sales to see a whole bunch of examples of her work. So just a highlight there for a local artist, and I'll post those links in the description. Moving on, I wanted to point out that there is a black woman currently running for Vice President of the United States. And no, I'm not talking about Joe Biden picking a running mate. I couldn't really care less. But what I am talking about is Angela Walker, who is running as Vice President with Howie Hawkins on the Green Party ticket. So I just wanted to play a few words from Angela here, and this is from a live stream show from Savage Joy on YouTube, and I'll link to this in the description when I post the replay as well. So just a short clip here of it, and if you want to watch the whole thing, I will post the link.
We like to look in this culture for saviors. And we have to look deeper than, hey, this guy wasn't Donald Trump. He's not a fascist. We have to look deeper. Under the Obama administration, the Black Lives Matter movement was born. The black man in office. So, I mean, we need to be honest about the fact that this person who is relatively benign that was not such a benign administration for immigrants. It was not a benign administration for Black folks. I mean, I remember speaking, he made and he's done this numerous times, where he chastised back in, I want to say it was 2016, chastised the folks organizing for Black Lives Matter on their tactics. And my thing is, how dare you? How dare you approach us with respectability politics, because the way that we're moving is not the way you think it needs to be done. Who are you to tell these young people how to do what they're doing? You are not out there with them. Mind your business and stay in your lane and let these young folks handle their business. You should know better. And that's what I'm feeling with this now. It's like you are not relevant to what's happening right now. You're not helping. You served capitalism in the way you were supposed to. And I think a whole lot of folks have to look at the fact that that's his role. That was his job. And I saw somebody on Twitter decrying the fact that the Democrats are not the leftist she had hoped they were. And all I could do was
yeah.
like, no.
Yeah.
We got so much work to do. Oh, we got so much work to do.
So go check out Angela Walker. She's got all kinds of statements and videos and things that you can check out to make sure that you are informed about the black woman who is currently running for Vice President of the United States, who never gets mentioned by the corporate media, and all they want to know is who Biden is going to pick. But we just need to ignore that circus completely and focus on what we need to do. As Angela said there, we have a lot of work to do. So I'll leave it at that, and I will link to that video in the description if you want to watch that whole interview. Moving on, compilations of many videos, and you can watch those videos yourself. And so I just wanted to talk about the bigger picture and have a discussion here about what we're all seeing. And so if you would like to share your thoughts, please jump in the comments and turn this into more of a discussion. I would like to focus on Seattle here for a little while. There are calls now for Mayor Jenny Durkan to resign. Those calls are growing now to include Shama Sawant, who is reportedly the first city councilor to sign on to the call for Mayor Jenny Durkan to resign. You can find more information about this. In fact, let me pull it up here. You can search hashtag Jenny Gotta Go, and Jenny is Jenny Durkan, the Seattle mayor, and so you can see the latest news on that effort in Seattle. Jenny Durkan's basically just failed to show any leadership. She said she was banning chemical warfare in the city for 30 days, and then the very next day, her police were already gassing people again. There have been just scandal after scandal up in Seattle, and we'll talk more about some of that. But like I said, the calls for Mayor Jenny Durkan are growing, and Shama Sawant has joined those calls as well. So you can search, you can search that on Twitter. Moving on, I wanted to show a clip that sort of is one of those ones where people who are criticizing protest say, why are you blocking the road? There could be emergency vehicles. And what I've seen is that protesters don't want to block emergency vehicles and have absolutely no problem letting them go by. So let's watch this video and see who does block the emergency vehicles and who is preventing the ambulance here from getting where it needs to go in a timely manner. Let's just watch. This is in Seattle.
I'm not sure what the situation is. I know the other night there was a seizure there, making way for them to come through.
Hold on, it's gonna back right out.
Not sure what that's about. Seems like you could have gone another route, but looks like the protesters are doing everything they can to get out of the way here.
Keep the road clear behind the ambulance, guys. Keep the back of it clear. Keep the back clear!
So the police will...
I will post a link to that in the description if you want to watch the whole thing, but essentially what's going on there is the police are refusing to move a simple barricade to allow a ambulance to get through. So just goes to show, you can show that to folks who say, well, people can protest but they shouldn't block roads. Well, you can show them that video. I want to highlight a thread here from Seattle activist and content producer, and I believe had something to do with, I believe he worked on Sean Scott's campaign, or I could be wrong, but something to do with socialist and progressive Seattle politics. This is Daeshik Kim Hawkins Jr., and you can find him at DAESHIK Jr. on Twitter. So this is about Sarah Eberhardt, who in Seattle was part of the protests, and then a couple of days later the police came and raided her and pulled her out of her car with her 9-year-old in the back seat, and the officers seemed to take it very personally and were rough in that encounter. I'm not going to play the video. You can look that up yourself. Day continues This is the day Seattle mayor banned tear gas. Enough dancing on Capitol Hill and falling for police propaganda. Law enforcement and Mayor Ginny has gone to war with their people. And then just more warnings about how police are tracking people based on social media and then coming after them. It seems in very revenge-oriented attacks and arrests, and so that is why folks are being really cautious about social media and what is being recorded and shared because of that police retaliation. And in this case, in the document from the court, they cite a meme that Sarah had posted on Facebook, which was a Star Wars meme. The Star Wars had run over some stormtroopers, and it had some blood on the front, and it said on the side, "This machine kills fascists." And this was a Star Wars meme with the Woody Guthrie, "This machine kills fascists." That's what Woody Guthrie had written on his guitar. And so that's just a classic American phrase there. And so, but the police went ahead and took that to imply that she had murderous intent against the police, which is just some really terrifying police state stuff there. I mean, so apparently if you're a Woody Guthrie fan and a Star Wars fan and you post a meme, you're an Antifa super soldier now. So that's just another example of just the ridiculous overreach in the community and the revenge-based policing that we see going on in Seattle that everyone is responding to as unacceptable. Another example of that I will pull up is how the Seattle Police Department is escalating the situation instead of de-escalating. And this is an example of that. They posted a picture of a couple of candles and they called it improvised explosives, which is just, what? So I'm pretty sure that's just a candle, bro. So anyway, it's just an example of how the Seattle police are escalating everything instead of de-escalating. So, you know, I was going to talk about Raz Simone, and I don't think I'm going to do that now, because I'm not sure what's going on with all that. So Raz Simone is a Seattle rapper who has been leading a lot of protests around Seattle. He stands up on top of his Tesla with a mic, and that kind of makes some people criticize that as showy, and I get it, but at the same time, like, it's a sound system that works and it's electric, and so that makes some amount of sense to me. But apparently he knocked out someone who was live streaming yesterday, and like a physical attack, and I don't even know what's going on and all that, and I don't want to get into like internal politics that I don't understand in communities that I'm not in, and so I'm not going to go speculating about all of that, but just be aware that there is some amount of drama and folks trying to figure out what's going on with regard to some of the protest leaders. I'm going to go ahead and move on to a broader Washington State story here. Manuel Ellis was killed by Tacoma police I believe in March of this year. And the video had just came out the other day. And I just had to highlight this and say his name because This is just not a well-known story. And Manuel's last words were, "I can't breathe." So rest in power to Manuel Ellis. March 3rd, died in handcuffs while being restrained on the ground by Tacoma police. His death has been ruled a homicide, and that is a CBS News article about it that I will link in the comments. So there's so many victims, I can't list them all, but the Tacoma police have a history of problematic assaults on citizens. I recall, of course, Jackie Salyers, a pregnant indigenous woman who was killed by Tacoma police. So I'll report back on what is going on in the Tacoma situation. I don't know enough at this time to comment on exactly what is going on up to the moment with Tacoma policing politics, so I will leave that for a future episode, and I'll follow up on that. But it's also just an example of what we're talking about with defunding and abolishing the police, because this is an example where the man was in crisis, and if we had a crisis response team that was focused on protecting everyone's lives, including the person who's having the crisis, then Manuel Ellis would be alive and would be with us today. But instead, we responded to that situation by sending violent armed thugs in uniforms, and he is not. So that is just one more out of far too many examples of why the whole system of policing that we have needs to be rethought, because there are so many situations that we deal with using police in our society that we could deal with another way that protects and honors and respects people's lives, all people, including black people and indigenous and other people of color that police. And again, when I talk about police in America, I include ICE and Border Patrol as well. So I am also concerned about the lives of immigrants as well. So when I say police, please don't forget that I am also talking about ICE and CBP, etc. Another name I wanted to mention here is Tiffany Eubanks. Is a black woman who was killed in Yakima. I don't know too much about that story, so I'll have to report back about that in the future, but just wanted to say her name, and you can look up the story of Tiffany Eubanks in Yakima to learn more. Moving on, I wanted to do a segment. One moment. Let me pull up the next link here. I want to talk about propaganda. Whoop. That's in the background. All right, that didn't work. I could fix it, but not important. So, I would like to talk about police propaganda, or propaganda, and it's been intensifying. And we've got to look out for all forms of this. And psychological operations and propaganda are sometimes obvious and sometimes less obvious. And sometimes the whole point is to essentially gaslight, right? They want to say that the police viewpoint reality is the only reality, and if you disagree, then you're just wrong, and what you believe is wrong. And so that's what propaganda is for. So let's talk about some aspects of police propaganda. Now, in Washington, D.C., we have this big Black Lives Matter painted on the street as a sort of a middle finger to Trump, right? Approved by D.C. Mayor Bowser. Now, the issue is that this is a political stunt that is targeted at Trump in order to scapegoat the actual system of policing, which is a deeper problem than just Trump. Mayor Bowser has a long problematic history of not supporting Black Lives Matter in Washington, D.C. She's a mayor and she controls a police department. And so to do a big PR stunt like this without addressing the demands of Black Lives Matter in the city that she has jurisdiction over is unacceptable. And so the internet just went wild for this big Black Lives Matter sign because everyone hates Trump, and, you know, I get it. But we need to look deeper. For example, Black Lives Matter DC, who you can find on Twitter at DMV Black Lives, posted on June 5th, quote, "This is a performative distraction from real policy changes. Bowser has consistently been on the wrong side of BLM DC history. This is to appease white liberals while ignoring our demands. Black Lives Matter means defund the police." So Black Lives Matter is clear in their demands. But when a mayor comes out and tries to make a performative display without agreeing or even acknowledging the demands of the actual Black Lives Matter organizations and movement, then what that is propaganda. And it's important to recognize it as such. I would like to highlight one other thread from DC in response to this. And this is a thread by Mysiki Valentine, who is a native DC resident and Black American. And he says, quote, "Don't be fooled," a thread. "It's amusing to see all the people who do not really know DC admire the Black Lives Matter paint on the ground. Did you know DC has one of the highest displacement rates of black families in the county?" I think he meant country there, but did you know how we rank number 1 for black child mortality rates? How about that the black communities have one hospital that's deeply defunded by the mayor and city council? Did you know over 80% of arrests in DC is to black people, while the population of blacks is only 46%? Enjoy the paint. Black Lives Matter means more than what can be displayed on the ground or a street sign. And I wanted to share that one because that's someone from DC, a resident, a local perspective there. Continuing the discussion of police propaganda, I want to show you this video. Remember in the last video I talked about how military overseas and the police domestically are one and the same, essentially. And so here is an example of that, of propaganda. This is in Iraq. These are children, and the U.S. military is trying to get them to abide by a curfew.
I'm doing video right now. He's teaching them the Macarena.
Right? Okay. Let's watch one more.
Break it down now.
And people get into it like it's just fun dancing. But keep in mind, those police have the same intent there, the same training, and the same mind for psychological operations that the U.S. military was using against Iraqis. Now, what do you do? One moment. So, what do you do when your mayor comes out to do police propaganda? What do you do? How do you react? Do you give him the microphone? Well, you want to ask them some questions. You want to figure out where they stand. You want to give them a chance to come around. But what do you do when they try to spew platitudes and they try to BS you, but they don't want to take a single dollar away from a cop? What do you do? Well, let's find out. This is Minneapolis.
You have to take responsibility here. I've been coming to grips with my own brokenness in this situation, my own failures, my own shortcomings, and I know there needs to be deep-seated structural reform in terms of how the department operates. The systemically racist system needs to be revamped. The police union needs to be put in its place. We need to make sure that everything from the union contract to the way that the arbitration functions to the way that our officers and the culture in the department behaves.
Jacob Fry, we have a yes or no question for you. Hey! Listen up, y'all. Listen up. Jacob Fry, we have a yes or no question for you. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding Minneapolis Police Department? What did I say? We don't want no more police. Is that clear? We don't want people with guns toting around in our community, shooting us down. You have an answer? It is a yes or a no. It is a yes or a no. Will you defund the Minneapolis Police Department? All right, be quiet, y'all. Be quiet, because it's important that we actually hear this. It's important that we hear this, because if y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. If y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. And if he says no, guess what the fuck we gonna do next year? What'd you say? Why they loud?
I do not support the full abolition of police.
All right, get the fuck out of here. Go, get out of here. Go home, Jacob, go home. 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 Go home, Jacob.
There you go. So next time your mayor comes out and takes a knee, you ask him, will you take the money away from the oppressors, the police? And if they say no, or they start blah, blah, blahing, you tell them GTFO. And you make them do that walk of shame, and then you run someone who does believe Black Lives Matter next election. So that's what we're doing here. So that video was shared by Jordan Ewell on Twitter. You can find him at JordanUHL. And that is a good account to follow. They share all kinds of things. But continuing with the topic of propaganda, I wanted to just end on a joke. Seattle comedian Brett Hamill, quote, "The SPD should just go ahead and put rainbow flags all over the identification markers on their uniforms. Checkmate, Durkin." So, this is what I'm talking about, right? And this is funny because, like, they would actually do that. They're taping over their badges. I mean, no. So don't fall for propaganda, and don't help them. Don't march with them. If they come and they want to march with you, then you ask them, do you commit to defunding the police? Yes or no? No BS, yes or no? And if they don't give you a yes, you tell them to get out of there. Because otherwise, they're just using you. Now, the movement to defund the police has gained steam all across America. Did you know that in America, 1/3 of all Americans killed by a stranger are killed by a cop? So what we need for safety is we don't need these police that are killing us. We need community safety and security departments and systems that protect all lives and respect all lives, including black lives. And that's what we're going to create. So in Minneapolis, well, you saw the mayor there waffling and refusing to commit. You have had movement on the Minneapolis City Council. And you have had Minneapolis City Councilors Steve Fletcher, who you can find on Twitter at MPLS Ward 3, and Lisa Bender at Lisa Bender MPLS. And both of those Minneapolis City Councilors have called to dismantle or disband the police department. Even Ilhan Omar, Representative Ilhan Omar, has signed on now. Quote, "The Minneapolis Police Department has proven themselves beyond reform. It's time to disband them and reimagine public safety in Minneapolis. Thank you," to Minneapolis Ward 3. And again, Minneapolis Ward 3, that's Steve Fletcher, who is a city councilor. So I will continue to report back on the effort to defund and abolish police in America, but the point is that there has been movement and there has been gains, and the reason is because we're not taking any equivocation or some baloney as an answer. It's a yes or no question. You can put in all the policy reforms and nonviolence training in the world, but if you don't threaten their budgets, nothing will fundamentally change. Now, on this show, I was going to do a segment. I actually was going to do a few segments that I'm not actually going to get to today. So I'm just going to mention a few things and wrap up, and I'm going to have to continue in a future episode. There's just too much to talk about. But I wanted to do a segment highlighting black content creators that you can support. And that it turns out that, of course, that's just going to be at least, its whole own episode. So I'm going to leave some of that for the future when I have more time to really get into that. But someone that I do want to highlight here because their humor has been just on point, and their commentary, historical commentary and analysis, is also on point. And so it's really good to find someone who has really good historical analysis and also is very good at humor. And at Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter is just such a person. This is an example. Someone had posted, "Man being arrested for mad dogging an officer," which is basically just staring an officer down. And so Chad Vigorous's response here is, quote, "It's amazing how you're basically supposed to accept that you need to treat police like dangerous animals. Don't look them in the eyes, no sudden movements or loud noises." So that is an excellent point there. And so you can find their commentary on Twitter, and I encourage you to follow them. But you can also find their podcast and I listen to it on SoundCloud. You can probably find it elsewhere as well, but it's called The Discourse. He's a co-host, and it's a really good podcast. So I highly recommend you check that out and support. The most recent episode is called Infiltrate and Control the Narrative with Vincent Bevins, who's the author of the Jakarta Method. And they talk about how anti-communist efforts by the CIA in the 1950s, to understand American history, you really need to understand this piece of it and the development and the maturation of the CIA and their techniques throughout the world, and their success in Indonesia in particular. So I highly recommend you check out this episode and this show. And one other thing I will mention here about the Discourse is they have a hilarious Patreon account. So check that out as well and support this excellent, brilliant black content creator. So check this out. If you are a $1 Patreon, you are a swoletariat. If you do $3 a month, you're a brocialist. And if you do $9 a month, you're a performative white ally. So check that out, and go ahead and support them as well. So that, I can't recommend this highly enough. Please go listen to this episode, The Jakarta Method, or that's the name of the book. Infiltrate and Control the Narrative. Interview with Vincent Bevins is the name of the episode there of The Discourse. So just a few quick bits here before I end the stream for today, and I'm going to have to get to some of these topics in a future episode, but just a few quick things. Our Revolution National has a strategy call on Monday night at 5:30 Pacific time, featuring Mike Schmidt, who just won as a Portland district attorney on holding rogue cops accountable and holding the Portland Police Department accountable. So we need to tune in, and Portlanders need to tune in and hold Mike Schmidt accountable now that he has won that race as district attorney. So I will report more on that in a future episode, but again, if you would like to hear from Mike Schmidt himself, you can tune into that Our Revolution National call Monday at 5:30, and just look up Our Revolution on their webpage for more information about that. I wanted to really briefly mention, and let's see, I guess no need for that right now, so I'll just do that, and for wrapping it up here, I wanted to really briefly mention that we really need to focus on keeping each other safe from coronavirus right now. There have been all these protests and everything going on, not to mention all of Trump's efforts to bungle our country's response to this virus, as well as local problems, as well as there is a connection with Black Lives Matter as well, because we have to recognize that Black lives are being lost to the coronavirus at a horrifying rate. And this is due to a number of factors, which I'll have to talk about in a future episode. But it's important for us, if Black lives are important for us, then it's also important for us to take that seriously, and do our best right now to follow, one moment. Follow sanitation and distancing and health protocols as best that we can. And that is, in fact, related to Black Lives Matter. So keep that in mind. I want to mention that ICE detainees are being gassed right now by ICE, by industrial cleaning chemicals that they say they have to spray for COVID, but they're just showering these entire facilities in these chemicals reportedly every 15 minutes and making people sick because they're not meant to be used in that way. And so when you use a strong toxic chemical in a way other than it was intended for, and it's causing harm to human beings, then that is chemical warfare, and that is what ICE is doing to detainees right now, and that has got to stop right now. So again, I don't have time to go into that in this episode, but keep that in mind and do what you can to protect the detainees. Tune into what's going on locally here at the Northwest Detention Center or whatever your nearest ICE detention center is to you. If you don't know what your nearest ICE detention center is to you, you should probably find that out and figure out what organizers are doing to support the folks inside. I want to also mention that these Black Lives Matter protests are not only significant in the big cities, they're happening all across the country, including small towns, and that is important to keep in mind because it's something that you don't see on the corporate media. And I don't have time to go into a bunch of examples of these right now, but I'll post 2 links to Twitter threads which have dozens of examples of Black Lives Matter protests in small towns across the country. So that's something that you're not really hearing on the news. You're just seeing the big cities because they want the big fancy headlines. But what you're not hearing is that this is a national movement, strong all across the country in small towns as well. And we need to keep that up and elevate that. I wanted to mention the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston, which was torn down, and congratulate the folks who were involved with that. So I just think that is amazing work, and that the idea that the city officials would then go out and make statements about how that's a great tragedy just shows that we need a reckoning in this country, and we need to get rid of all these monuments to all these slaveholders. There is a quote in the Run the Jewels new album by Mike Render, also known as Killer Mike, quote, "Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar." And so it's important for us to remember that these statues are everywhere. In fact, we live in Washington State, and Washington was, of course, a slave owner as well, and did horrific things. Just look up his teeth and other stories. And so we really need to get rid of all these slave owner monuments. And I think that as long as the state of Washington is named Washington, and as long as we have slave owners on our dollars, then we have not completed that work. And so don't leave it to some protesters to pull a statue down. That work continues in all aspects of America. So it's not a narrow focus on specific statues of specific people. It is all across and throughout our society. So, and then one last thing I wanted to shout out is there are some activists who are trying to boost people's stories of police mistreatment on Twitter. And they sent me a note saying if folks use the hashtag #IGotPoliced with their stories of police mistreatment, then folks can see that and amplify those stories. So with that, I am going to leave it for this week. There's always so much to talk about, and I'm going to have to continue this. So please let me know what you want to talk about. Let me know your comments, critiques. Hopefully I reduced the number of ums in this show. And we will. Oh, I did it again. So still work to do. But anyway, I would really like to hear from you. So please comment. I really appreciate everyone's support. I've had a lot of views this week while everyone is trying to see what's going on with Black Lives Matter and how they can help and participate, and just what to even think of it all and how to put it in a big picture perspective. And so I'd like to continue that discussion, and I imagine Black Lives Matter will not just be the subject of these episodes this weekend, but will be a recurring topic throughout the existence of this show. So stay tuned, and you can email me at PoliticOly@gmail.com if you would like to make a audio or video comment, or ask about a collaboration. I would love to have a guest host or anybody contributing content. If you would like to share your art, again, this is a shirt designed by a local Black artist, Lebebe, who I'll link in the description. If you would like to share your art on the show or anything else, please contact me and we can make it happen. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and Black Lives Matter. Take care of yourself, but keep at it. Never stop. We got work to do.